Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Are you performing security audits so you know who has access to your systems? Listen to today's episode for 4 scenarios when employees or contractors use their system access for fraudulent purposes. Then see how you can get a 5-step plan to perform a system audit so you can at least limit who has access to those that need it. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 347, Access Gone Wrong. 4 times when employees exploited their access and colluded with fraudsters. Now, one thing I do want to say is this one is all about how when employees, or actually contractors too, colluded with fraudsters like successfully. Just know, and you probably already do, that fraudsters are tracking you and your employees, anyone that they think can help them perpetrate fraud, all over social media. They contact you and or your internal other colleagues, internal team members, and they try to do things that get you right to give them what they want. Now, I talked about this a long time ago on podcast 129, and it was called A Lesson Learned from a 2020 Tesla Insider Threat to Protect Your Vendor Team. Now, I will say at that time, it did not work, but it looks like that trend is turning. And so that's why I wanted to do today's podcast, but definitely have a listen to podcast episode 129. It's actually very interesting. They took the employee uh, on a trip, like all expense paid, and it still didn't work. But you have to hear what they tried and why it didn't work and what the employee ended up doing. But again, doesn't seem like, right, that is always the case. And today we're going to be talking about 5 times where the employee actually colluded with the fraudster. And then I am going to talk about at the end where I have a webinar that is available. It's free, and it talks about or walks through a 5-step plan so that you can implement a security audit. So at least you can know that those that have access actually do need to have access versus what we all do, right, as practitioners, where we don't always take away access when we need to. And those of you that are on the accounts payable team, vendor setup and maintenance team, you know that access to the vendor master file can give access to remittance details, which if that happens or falls into the wrong hands, can definitely mean payment fraud. So definitely check the show notes for that. And I'll talk about it a little bit at the end as well. All right, so let's start with the first one, and that is with checks. So I saw an article that said that Postal Service says many checks stolen through the mail are done by its own employees. And this is not the first time that I have seen like articles about checks being stolen by employees, but this is the first time that I've seen that the Postal Service has admitted it. Now, building on that is this article or posting from the IRS. And this actually was posted May 23rd, 2025. So, very recent this year, as of the date of this podcast, anyway. But there were four individuals, they were charged with $63 million. And that includes two postal employees. And so, what happened was is these two postal employees would steal the checks and then they would provide the stolen checks to the two fraudsters in exchange for payments. And the two fraudsters would then take those checks and market them for sale via Telegram Messenger. And then they said prices vary based on the face value of the checks. Um, one of the Telegram channels, oh, what was this name? Whole Food Slips was used to advertise high dollar checks, while another channel named Uber Eats Slips was used to advertise lower dollar checks. So, slips apparently is a term commonly used in these schemes to refer to stolen checks. Now, a quick myth that may have been true at some point in time, but definitely is not true now. And that is the fact that the fraudsters are here in the US. As a matter of fact, in reading through this article, they're actually in Detroit. And if any of you guys know, I am from Detroit. I came back to this area when back in 2021 because I was in Oklahoma. But you know, when the grandkids come, you got to come back. So, they're actually in my state. I'm outside of Detroit now, but it's still very close. And I love going downtown Detroit. And apparently, so does fraud. So that was one example, right, of check fraud and how they are. Uh, Postal employees are colluding with fraudsters, and not fraudsters from overseas or in another country, but fraudsters right here in the US and unfortunately in my area. All right, so that was the first one. Now let's get to the second one. And the second one might be a little scarier because this was a contractor. So, a Brazilian IT worker sold his access to a payment system, and he worked at a company called C&M Software in Brazil. And what he did was because C&M Software is approved by or was approved by Brazil's central bank to connect to financial institutions, including an instant payment system called PIX, PIX. The IT worker, confessed to selling his corporate login credentials to hackers for approximately $2,700. He got two cash payments. Then he turned around and assisted the hackers, right, the fraudsters, by creating separate accounts for them in the system. And then he enabled remote access. And what that did is it allowed the hackers to steal over $100 million dollars in U.S. dollars. It's 540 million Brazilian reais. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the currency, but in Brazilian currency, it was 540 million, but in USD, it was 100 million. And they did that from at least one financial institution. impacting at least six financial institutions in total. Now, if you ask me, $2,700 for the 100 million plus that the Frosters got, not sure if that was a good enough deal, but you need $2,700. You might need $2,700. And what ended up happening is the central bank had to shut off access to parts of C&M software systems so that they can contain the damage. Now, one thing to note about this IT worker is that he's a former electrician. Now, how did he get from an electrician to a IT worker that can collude with fraudsters? Well, first of all, he said he was at an age where he was expected to be in a leadership position, um, and he wasn't. And so he wanted to start over. And so he did just that. He went into technology, and then he landed a job as a junior back-end developer at the software company, C&M Software. And because of that role, fraudsters targeted him. And the hackers, when they approached him, they knew specific details about his work at C&M, suggested that they had researched, right, the company's employees, which is not that hard to do. We put it all out there on LinkedIn. And so he was a target just because of what he did. And if you think about it, for, my listeners, you guys are probably in accounts payable somewhere, you're in vendor setup and maintenance, you're in procurement. And so you and your internal team members, colleagues, direct reports, other team members in the accounts payable, the vendor setup and maintenance, procurement, treasury, right, functions are all targets. And so this can happen to you. This can happen to other internal team members. It's a little scary, but yes, just because of his job, he was targeted by fraudsters, and so can you and your internal team members. All right, so on to number three. And actually, the last two here, number three and number four, all involve or both involve bank employees, which is again kind of scary. So this one comes from Frank on Fraud. And if you guys don't know, but Frank on Fraud is a newsletter, it's a person that reports on fraud, and you can sign up for their newsletter as well. Just put in, or his newsletter as well, just put in frankonfraud.com and it will come up. But this came out of that newsletter. And this says, or the name of this article is TD Bank Employees Bribery Scheme, a $37,000 fraud that cost the bank $72,000. And it might not seem like a lot of money, but I did want to include it because I think this is happening more than we know. So, or more than has been reported. And so what happened is he opened up bank accounts for complete strangers for a fraud network that he worked with. And he pocketed bribes of $200 to $250 per account. And so over a year's period, it netted him $37,000, but cost TD Bank a whole lot more. And so you might be thinking, well, with these checks being stolen, or with, bank account fraud or business email compromise scams where legitimate payments are redirected to fraudulent accounts, you might think, well, how is this being done? Why are these checks being cashed on these accounts? Why are the diverted ACH payments or wire payments going to these accounts? If they're not romance scams or mules, right? What's the other way? Well, the other way is, they just open an account, and the account is open with either fraudulent documents, or they are colluding with bank employees to open these accounts. And this particular employee charged, per account that he opened. And so that is one way, right, that the fraudsters can get those account open so that they can deposit those funds either from stolen checks that have been washed or from diverted legitimate payments due to business email compromise. So that's how these things can happen. And this was what he considered to be his side hustle. Well, his side hustle, unfortunately, also, got him arrested. And I didn't say how much time he's going to get, but it does say that between November 2022 and November 2023, so again, a year, he opened up 140 bank accounts. And because he did that, it helped the fraudsters bypass the identity controls that the bank had put into place. Now, again, I'm going to put the link to this. Really, it's a PDF that talks about not only the fraud, but it also includes the complaint that was filed in the United States District Court, District of New Jersey. Now, in this fraud, these were two brothers, and one worked for Wells Fargo and Company. He was a banker, and what he did is he used his banking position to open fraudulent accounts in the names of shell companies and individuals. And wow, this is so bad, including the stolen identities of developmentally disabled persons residing in long term care facilities. And so from March 2020 through April 21, the defendants submitted loan applications with false information so that they could secure the PPP loans or the Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, EIDL. I forgot about those two loan programs. And so when they got the funds for those loans, those funds were dispersed into the bank accounts that the one of the brothers had created and was controlled by both of them. So some were opened by the banker at Wells Fargo. Unfortunately, right, the ill-gotten gains were reportedly spent on casinos, luxury cars, jewelry, and cash withdrawals. But again, this is another instance where a worker at a bank used their access, in this case, his access to create or open accounts to do just that, to receive these fraudulent funds from the EIDL loans and the PPP loans. So in this one, you have a person that works at the bank that has access, right, to open accounts, and you also have yet another person that will help or perpetrate the fraud. And so in this case, they were both brothers, the banker and the other person involved in the fraud. And I don't know if I said it earlier, but the total amount that they got away with was $2.7 million. So, as I talked about earlier, I am going to link to actually not one, but two webinars. And the first one is called Prevent Payments to Internal Fraudsters, Stopping Bad Actors in Your Organization. Now, it is sponsored by NS Knox. And if you haven't heard of NS Knox before, I've done plenty of webinars with them. But they have a tool so that you can do bank account ownership validation, both US and non US. I think they said they're in like every country. But the webinar itself is about an hour long. I do about a half an hour and I talk about some manual controls you can put into place. I also have some other examples of internal fraud, but this time this is, for their own gain. I don't think they weren't colluding with fraudsters, but one of them is an example, and I might have talked about it before, but it is an internal fraud that happened at the city where Ronald Reagan grew up. And this financial director got away with fraud for over 20 some years. And so it turned into a documentary that was originally on Netflix. Now, though, it's on Amazon Prime and it's also on YouTube. So you can check out that webinar again with a link in the show notes. And then I'll have another one, and I think this is the one I actually mentioned earlier, but it's called a security audit to protect vendor data and avoid fraud in 5 steps. And so some of the immediate takeaways are three key pieces of vendor data that are considered sensitive. What is least privileged access and why it's critical, right? That you need it to follow it for vendor sensitive data. Also, you can identify the risks that result from unnecessarily exposing vendor sensitive data. And then, of course, the 5 steps to implement a security audit that can be performed by the vendor team with really very minimal IT input. So I'm going to put the link to both of those webinars in the show notes. Man, these show notes today are going to have a lot of links in them, but you know what? Both of these webinars are free. And so make sure that you click through to sign up for them if you are interested. And they're both recorded now, so you can watch them anytime at your convenience. All right, so that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 347th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.